The scripture reading for today is from Jeremiah chapter 29, verses 11 through 14. For surely I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. Plans for your welfare and not for harm, to give you a future with hope. Then when you call upon me and come and pray to me, I will hear you. When you search for me, you will find me, if you seek me with all your heart. I will let you find me, says the Lord, and I will restore your fortunes and gather you from all the nations and all the places where I have driven you. And I will bring you back to the place from which I sent you into exile. And now I invite Jason to come up and share his message.
I opened my eyes for the first time in 8 days to look up to see a doctor looking down at me. Later, I found out that was the doctor that saved my life. He looked down at me and said, "You're lucky to be alive." I said, "Thank you." And I reached up and gave him a high five. 8 days earlier, I was skydiving. And on the third jump of the day, I was coming in for a landing on the same field I landed on hundreds of times before. All of a sudden, a large wind hit me from behind, picked me up, and slammed me into the side of an airplane hangar, a metal building at 30 miles an hour, head on. I hit so hard on the left side of my body, it broke 10 of the 12 ribs on my left side. The impact from the ribs pushed my heart from where it sits on the left side today, out of the pericardial sac onto the right side of my body, and twisted it up. No one at that hospital had ever done that surgery on anyone before, because they said no one had ever made it in alive. The first few days, they had to keep testing my heart to make sure it worked as I laid in that coma. They finally satisfied it worked, because if it didn't work, well, I wouldn't be here today. They finally closed up my chest and started working on everything else, because the rest of my body was a mess as well. I had a broken femur, broken pelvis in the front and the back, lacerated spleen, colon had to be pushed back to where it was. My diaphragm was ruptured. My lungs were collapsed. My right wrist was broken. My left elbow was dislocated and fractured, and I had a concussion. When I woke up in that hospital, I was a bit confused. I knew exactly what happened with the accident. It was just after I hit that building, I sort of blacked out. So I didn't know what was actually wrong with me until they finally let me know little by little. As I lay there in the confusion, I just saw bandages all over me. Too many tubes to count coming out of my body with blood draining, and machines all around me making their own little beeping noises. In that confusion, I didn't know what to ask. I didn't know what to say. What do you do when you don't know what to do? Well, you default to your foundation. So I closed my eyes and I prayed, just like I did before I jumped out of that plane. And every time I jumped out of that, before I jumped out of the plane, I would pray. I would also pray on the days I didn't jump out of planes. And I prayed, "Lord, just watch over me. Give me the strength to get through today. Give me the strength to get through tonight." And a lot of prayers in that time were all the same message. So I didn't know if I was going to get through that next day. But even in those early days, I didn't question, well, why did that wind hit me when I was 100 feet off the ground? Because when you're 100 feet off the ground, you can't turn, because that'll dive you straight into the ground and would have killed me. I had to do nothing Just let it play out. Whatever the wind was going to do, the wind was going to do to me. If I was 1,000 feet off the ground, I could have turned. I would have never hit anything. But I never questioned why it happened at that time, because God had a plan for me. For the last few years before that accident, I felt like I was handcuffed to a treadmill going at sprint speed. I had taken a new job. I didn't realize it was going to turn into 12 to 14 hours a day, year after year, with little and no breaks. All I felt like I was doing is get to the next day. I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't spending as much time with my family as I should have, missing family events, not spending time with my friends. I had a long list of things I wanted to accomplish that had nothing to do with work, like volunteering at a hospital, where I was right then. I felt like I'd been serving the wrong master for too many years. You could say skydiving almost killed me, but it also let me step off that treadmill and take a deep breath for the first time in many years. When I laid in that hospital bed, as they told me, don't move. And that really wasn't a problem. I wasn't moving. I eventually realized that having those broken legs and broken pelvis and not being able to move was a blessing. See, it take away all my normal coping skills. If I wasn't happy, I can go out and run and get an endorphin rush. I could jump out of that plane and at least not think of what my life had devolved to in the last few years, because I could forget about it for a couple of hours. But when you're taking away those coping mechanisms, you're just sitting there and thinking about your life and what it had become and what you never wanted to go back to again. As time went on, it got tough. When all you can blame for the accident is yourself, when you realize what kind of damage you did to your family, you can't even imagine what it must have felt like when they got that call and said, your son's been in a terrible accident. When they walked into that room and saw the breathing tube down my throat and me not moving in the coma, what that must have felt like. When my mom took a picture of me while I was laying in that coma, because she said later, I wanted to have one last picture just in case she didn't make it through. Pain started after those drugs started coming out of my body. The therapist would come in on a daily basis and move my arm an inch or two when I was on the verge of passing out. It hurt so bad. You start doubting yourself. How am I ever going to get out of this hospital when I can't even move my arm an inch or two without being on the verge of passing out? When all that you can think about is how you disappointed yourself. It's hard to do when it's weeks on weeks on weeks. A nurse finally came in my room one morning and said, you're not looking so good. Do you want to see the psychiatrist? I said, hold on, let me look at my daily planner. Well, there's nothing else going on. Why not? The psychiatrist came in and asked how I was doing. And I talked about what I was going through. And he started naming off drugs that I only recognized from seeing them on TV, on those advertisements. They're all antidepressants. And I asked him, well, why do you want to give them to me and what are they going to do? And he said, well, it'll take out the highs and lows. I didn't have much at that point. I was laying in bed, couldn't move. At least I had my lows. It hurt, but I felt something. I looked at him and said, get out of my room and never come back. Because I knew he was just trying to take me on a shortcut. I realized the reason I was there when I couldn't move is to really address what was going on in my life. Not pushing it down the road, really confronting it for the first time in a long time. It was the first time I was mad since I got out of that coma. And the sun set, and in the hospital, it gets really quiet at night, and you're in with your own thoughts. I realized beating myself up and going through all that was necessary. But now I had to get better physically. I thought about the parable of talents. I realized I was that servant who'd bury his talents in the ground. Sure, I couldn't move. Sure, I couldn't do anything physical. But I was thinking all the things I couldn't do, not what I could do. And I still had some things left that I could do. I had to create momentum if I was ever going to get better. I thought I had in my mind, well, it was no worse than it was before the accident, but you can question why I jumped out of planes, but I had to prepare my mind for the journey ahead. There's going to be ups, downs. You're going to go through places you never went through in your life before. Things unexpectedly were going to come up that you had to deal with. I had thought of other journeys I'd been on before. For the first time, I admitted to myself that I wasn't going to get better in a day. I wasn't going to get better in a week. I wasn't going to get better in a month. I felt like a weight lifted off me. I put all this pressure on myself to get better right away when that wasn't even possible. But I thought to myself that night, you just need to get this much better every day. And I said, I can do that. I thought, what else can I do? I could train my pain. Pain was a constant at that point. It wasn't going to go away anytime soon. Pain can change your personality. Pain can make you go down bad roads. And if I knew I was going to get better, I had to control that pain. See, we're in a hospital and you're in a situation where I'm laying on that bed. They'll come in every couple hours and they'll try to keep you comfortable and ask you, do you want pain pills? And you have to ask yourself, well, am I taking it to zone out or not be in the present? Or taking it for pain? And from that day forward, I said, as much as I could possibly tolerate, I will not take pain pills because I wanted to be present. I then had to think about that guilt I was feeling all day, just beating myself up. What did I do to my family? What did I do to my friends with this accident? I realized the best present I could give them was to get better. See, they didn't blame me for that accident. They said, it's an accident, it happens, it's okay. But if I was going to continue to use that energy for doing nothing good, but beating myself up, it wasn't going to get me better. I had to forgive myself if I was going to move on. Then I thought about that story I told over 100 times, the story of the accident. Every time someone new would come into my room from the hospital, I would say, I read that medical report.
Honey, look at where I keep turning it down. It's like
You're
not
still
even
here.
halfway up.
There's a kid.
Sorry. It's been on since 9.
All right. Oh, that's okay. Every time someone would come in the room, they would ask the story. They said, we can't believe you're alive. Why don't you tell us what happened? I would tell it over and over and over again. And when I was in that depressed state, I just got sick of telling it. I was reliving that accident every day, all day. And then when they asked me, I relive it again. Then I realized that story is about me, but telling that story is not for me. It's for the person who's asking. I noticed in those weeks laying in that bed that those people in the hospital see so many bad outcomes, so many bad things. You're usually not in the hospital when something good happens. And they have to endure that day after day after day. So I wanted them to know, whenever they questioned whether they made a difference in anyone's life, that they in fact made a difference. I wanted to give them hope. If I could live through what I just lived through, other people can do the same. And after that night, everything changed. That therapist kept on coming in every day like she loved to do and wrench on that arm. It still hurt just as much. I still yelped and yelled just as much in the pain, but I would tell her, I don't care what I sound like, just keep on doing it. I need to get better. I'm not going to be better if I'm comfortable. Make me uncomfortable. She would finish that hour-long session of me yelping. It was like a little celebration. I got through it again. And I tell her I can't wait for tomorrow because I knew that was the way to get better. Finally, I went back to the orthopedic doctors. They x-rayed my body again. They finally looked at my arms again and said, "We're going to take the casts off." I said, "Progress." That next morning, I got up for breakfast and I opened my yogurt for the first time, that cellophane top that seems so easy to open. But it was the first time in 10 weeks I was able to open that. It was the first time I could open the top of a Gatorade bottle. Those little plastic things that go around that are so easy to break, I couldn't break them until that day. And I started getting a little bit better each day. They sent me to the next hospital because those insurance companies, well, they're just about profit, aren't they? And if they get me closer to home, the bill starts going down a little bit. That first day in that rehab hospital, they put me in a wheelchair, finally out of that bed. I was in front of a mirror for the first time I saw myself in 10 weeks. I had no shirt on, and it was hard to look at. I mean, after laying in that bed for 10 weeks, all your muscle goes away because you're not using it. So I was just skin hanging on bone. I didn't really like to look at myself at that moment. But I looked beyond that. I looked in that mirror, I just looked into my eyes and said, "Are you who you proclaim you are?" See, we build up this self-image of ourselves of what we can do in the best of times. But when you're in the worst of times, are you willing to judge yourself by that same doctrine? It wasn't a question I could answer that right then is a question that only could be answered in time. Well, what I did every day. Over this 10 weeks in the hospital, I learned to advocate for myself. You better ask for what you want for your care so that you can get better. I told them on that first day, I said, "I'm going to walk out of this hospital on the last day." They looked at me like, "Yeah, I don't think that's possible." They didn't say it, but I could see it on their face. Looking back, I could understand why they thought that. I mean, the first time they put me in the wheelchair, I only could wheel it about 10 feet. They stopped me and said, "We'll wheel you the rest of the way to the cafeteria because if we let you keep wheeling yourself, time's going to be over for food." Said, "All right." A week before, I got the x-rays and they said I couldn't walk yet. So their thought process was, he's probably not going to get another x-ray and be cleared to walk before he gets out of here. We better prepare him to get out of here in a wheelchair. Like they heard that story before, like they've seen it too many times. But I had faith that I was going to walk out of it. As time went on, I judged myself by how far I could push that wheelchair, how many exercises I could do during the rehab. And then I would go back to my room. I would do all the exercises I could on my own. I wanted to take advantage every minute of the day. And then some of those physical therapists would come in throughout the day, and they would notice I was working out on my own and doing things on my own, in addition to what I was doing in the therapy sessions. They started giving me more and more things to do on my own because they only had so many hours they could help me a day. Some of them may have started to actually think, maybe he is going to walk out of here. Or maybe they were enablers, who knows. But either way, I was appreciative of them giving me more attention. Finally, the next time I went to the orthopedic surgeon for the big leg x-rays and pelvis x-rays. See, I had been in there for a couple weeks at this point. Insurance was only going to pay for me to be there for so long. If I didn't get cleared on those x-rays, I was probably going home in a wheelchair. The doctor gave me the news. You're not healed, or we're going to let you stand up. I got back to the rehab hospital, and they said, are you ready to walk? See, I'd been preparing for that day I was laying in bed to walk for the first time. They put me in parallel bars, put my wheelchair in there, and they said, stand up. You would think I had hundreds of pounds on my back like I was working out of the gym because my legs were shaking uncontrollably, but I stood up. They said, all right, take a few steps, and my legs were shaking out of control because I hadn't been standing in over 3 months. They let me do it 2 or 3 more times. They put me back in my wheelchair. And the physical therapist who was the most skeptical that I'd walk out of there again was the one who was pushing me back to my room. And about halfway back to my room, she said, you know, I thought you were going to be a lot happier when you walked for the first time. She said, I've been doing this for 15 years. And with injuries you have, and the fact that you haven't been on your feet in 3 months, I've never seen anybody just stand up and walk like that before. And I said to her, my goal is not to take a couple steps. Remember, my goal is to walk out of here. A week passed and my last day came at the rehab hospital. I stood up, I put the crutches under my arms, and I walked out. I got home, and I had convinced new people of the new goals, new therapists from the outpatient. And I started to go to work 8 to 10 hours a day. And I mean work. I didn't mean that place that paid me money. I meant work on this body. I did it like my job because I was doing it for me and I was doing it for everyone else who had helped me. I finally went for another surgery. They took a hammer and a chisel to my elbow because it just wouldn't bend, and they had to break a bunch of bone. A couple days later, I went back to the doctor to x-ray my lower body, and they said, okay, you're healed. I said, all right. I said, can I run? That doctor looked at me like, if you want to, if you can try. It's okay. I got in my car and I went home. On the way home, I had thought about 3 months prior when they first said I could put weight on my legs. I asked that same question to the doctor. I said, well, when do you think I'm going to be able to run again? And the doctor looked at me like, is that a real question? And I looked back at him and he realized it was a real question. And he said, you know, maybe never again. You may be in too much pain. It just may not work. What that doctor didn't know was a week after I woke up from that coma, when I was laying in my bed, I thought, well, physically, what does recovery mean to me? I thought, I'm going to do a triathlon again. I did many in the past because I thought, well, that means my elbow works and my arm, my legs work, my heart works. It seemed reasonable. I said, oh, maybe 2 years in the future, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna work towards that. I need something to shoot for. And when I got home that day after that doctor's visit, I ran. Now it more looked like really ugly running. It was more, but it was more than a walk, and you needed a starting place. Luckily, there was no mirror where I could see myself running, but I called it a run. And I went 50 feet. It was just a starting point. Every day after that, go another 50 feet. The weather started getting a little bit nicer. And I got on my bike for the first time outside. They finally cleared my elbow to say, you can go back and swim. You're not going to destroy your arm if you go in the pool and start trying to swim. I talked to my mom on the phone. She was always concerned in my recovery. And she said, you know, after they knew you were going to live and after you're out of that coma, the doctors took us aside and said, you know, he's not going to walk for at least 6 months. I walked in 3. They said you wouldn't go back to work for at least a year. I went back in 7. So I thought to myself, well, why am I going to wait 2 years to do that triathlon if I could do it in 1 year? I beat everything else by half. So I remembered a race I had done years earlier in June. I looked it up and it's one day before the 1 year anniversary of the accident. So I signed up. I had 3 months to train. I was kind of starting from zero. My heart wasn't in shape. My body was minimally functional. Finally, that day came. And there was torrential rain that day. 46 degrees. Isn't it supposed to be June? The starting gun went off. I plunged in that 59-degree water and started swimming. I got about 100 yards from shore, and my heart was pounding out of my chest. I was having a panic attack. I hadn't had a panic attack. Well, the only time I ever had a panic attack was those first few weeks after I woke up from that coma. I'd get woken up in the middle of the night with my heart pounding out of my chest. I turned over and I looked back to shore. Sure, it'd be easy to turn around, but I had come too far to turn around. I had to look at myself in that mirror again at the end of the day and be who I proclaimed I was at the toughest of times. I took a couple more deep breaths, turned back over, and swam the rest of the swim course. I got on the bike. And when you're soaking wet head to toe, 46 degrees is quite cold. Halfway through the bike, I lost feeling in my hands and my feet. With about a third left of the bike, I had a mechanical malfunction. Only one gear worked. Unfortunately, it was a big one. It was hard to get over those hills. As I came into the end of the bike, I thought to myself, the only thing I want to do on this run is just run the whole thing. No matter how slow it is, I just don't want to walk. And I finished that run. I didn't walk. I packed up everything and went on the way home. And I thought all those people had helped me to get to that point. It helped me to get through to prove I could use my body. But those people that helped me were as much a part of this effort than I was. See, when you're in your rehab and people ask you, well, how are you doing? Or what's going on? And you have to give very vague answers like, well, I guess I'm walking better than I was. Or, but this race kind of connected to me. One of the reasons I chose to do it was either you do it or you finish or you don't finish. When you tell someone, they say, well, how are you doing? When I would go back and visit them, I said, well, I did a triathlon. And they say, what? Yeah, I, 0.9 mile swim, 30-mile bike, 6.2 mile run. It gave them something to hold on to, something to hope, something to finish that story whenever they're feeling down about what they were doing in the hospital and how hard it was. They could at least think back and say, look how much we helped that person. Look where we got that person by what we did every day with that person. It gave them a story to tell to someone else, so someone else had hope. I had unknowingly been training for this, to go through this trial my entire life. See, God prepared me with everything I needed to know before I ever needed to know it. I realized trials test your faith, but builds perseverance. God will not tempt you beyond what you can handle, and he'll give you a way out. When you're burdened and tired, he'll give you rest. If you dig down and build a foundation on the rock, when that storm comes, you will not be shaken. I'm just a normal person, just like anybody else. I was so lucky that God blessed me to intervene in my life when I needed him most. He watched over me when I would needed to be watched over. He gave me what I need when I needed it. See, in the Bible, there's scriptures and miracles that happened so long ago. But they're just as relevant today as they were when they were written. See, those scriptures can be used. You just need to apply them. Miracles happen today just like they happened then. Because I wouldn't be standing here if there wasn't a miracle. And it's not a miracle because I thought it was. I just went through it. I have nothing to compare it to. I didn't realize how long the odds were for me to survive until doctors would start talking to me. And you'd see their face and their reactions when you'd go back for follow-ups. You see, they told my parents they had never done that surgery before because no one ever made it in alive. The day after the surgery, the first person on the scene in the hospital was my good friend and also my emergency contact. Before my family could fly out from the East Coast, she was there. And that doctor who had saved my life walked in and stared at me. And as she would say, he stared at me for a really long time. She was already unnerved from hearing all this that happened in the accident. But she started even grown more concerned. She finally said, "Is there something wrong? Why do you keep staring at him?" And the doctor turned to her and said, "I'm staring at him because I can't believe he's alive. He should have never made it off that field alive. He should have never made it to the hospital alive. He should have never made it through the surgery alive. No one survives what he just survived." God has wisdom beyond what we can sometimes comprehend. But he has a plan for all of us. A plan for us to prosper, not to harm us, to give us hope in a future. Every day I wake up and I'm reminded of the accident. Because when I'm getting dressed, I can see the scar from the top of my chest all the way to my belt line. But it's a scar I never want to go away. Because it reminds me of the wrong path I was going down. And that God interceded. Because he had a plan for me. He gave me a future and a new lease on life and a new direction and something to do for him in the future.
Thank you, Jason. I think